let me just say good leadership traits for a crisis. So I think first one is really about the difference between knowing and doing. So a lot of people understand something, but very few people are able to do something based on that. So that's the difference between knowing and doing. It's also the difference between intellect and character. Intellect is in being able to understand, patterns, spot patterns. Intellect is in being able to understand interconnections well, but character is in being able to do something about it. So for example, if you believe that integrity is important, you could do two things. One is you could lead a life of high integrity. That is because you know it, integrity is important, you're leading a life of high integrity. But if you're a leader, you are demonstrating character if you convince 1,000 other people that leading a life of integrity is important. And if you can convince your company that integrity should be a value that we all live by, then you're demonstrating character. So character requires courage because it requires you to go out and convince those 1,000 people that integrity is important. Character, for example, I'll take a real life example. So for example, in during the 2008 crisis, everyone knew that there was a housing bubble. Many people actually knew that there was a housing bubble that had built up and that the valuations that were pretty much unsustainable. But there was one hedge fund manager called John Paulson who took a bet against the housing market based on that knowledge. He bet his farm and house on it. He bet $1 billion and actually made a profit of almost $12 billion. And the challenge is that he could have lost all the $1 billion because the markets can remain irrational for longer than you can remain solvent, as Keynes had said. So therefore, he could have lost all that $1 billion. But he realized that let me take this bet because I'm sure that the housing market is overvalued. It's a matter of time before it collapses. And I'm hoping to make that money before it collapses. And markets eventually collapse, and that's how he made his money. That's the difference between character and intellect. Raghuram Rajan knew, many others knew that the bubble was there, but none of them did anything about it, excepting someone like John Paulson. Similarly, Warren Buffett, knew that and he acted on it. So, you had Lehman Brothers collapsing, as you said. It was a historic collapse. Nobody ever believed $640 billion in assets collapsed. And nobody at that point of time wanted to touch an iBank. But Warren Buffett came in and invested $5 billion in Goldman Sachs. And he invested it when the Goldman Sachs was falling. It had fallen to less than half the price, pre-crisis. So he invested $5 billion in a falling market. That is character. And he made a huge amount of money. He made a huge fortune by this smart investment. So the first leadership trait, I think, is the difference between knowing and doing, which I call intellect and character. The second one I would say is, leadership that trait that brings in a combination of feminine and masculine leadership traits. A lot of the crisis, you think about it hard. Historically, any crisis in this world, whether it was a war, whether it was a financial crisis, whether it was a pandemic, think very carefully and you will find that the cause of a crisis was unbridled masculine ambition, masculine greed, and masculine need for power, nothing else. Just think about it carefully. These are the three things which have caused any single crisis. And therefore, I think it's important to bring in an element of feminine leadership traits, which is about caring, which is about collaboration, compassion. These are very important leadership traits. I think in corporate world, many of these traits, female traits, feminine traits are missing. And therefore, you end up in these cyclical crises from time to time. You need to bring, so great leaders are able to bring a combination of the two. And in all difficult situations, they unleash this blend.